America is reopening again and privileged people are showing their ass. America going into Memorial Day would not be America without strip clubs, and strip clubs would not be strip clubs without stimulus. The strip clubs are open, the restaurants are opening, America's reopening, and of course the Democrats and the Republicans are doing the one thing they both agree on, talking more stimulus. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about gold. We'll talk about silver, copper, uranium, the VIX below 30. I am Gerardo Del Real, along with my co-host, the frugal, the insightful, the intelligent, the guilty Catholic, Mr. Nick Hodge. How are you, Mr. Hodge? This is episode 71 of Bizarro World. You believe that?
I'm doing well. We're moving from showing ass to eating ass, which may be an upgrade depending on who you talk to. I'm not sure. Just happy to be here. How are you?
I don't know that you can do one without the other. I am well. Thank you for asking. Let's get right to it. Gold closed right around the 1736 level. Pretty quiet week. Silver 1715 started a run, pulled back. Copper looks good at 238. I'm sensing some infrastructure stimulus that Dr. Copper is sniffing out. Let's start with gold, Nick. How did you view the trading action this week? And we'll talk about the overall indices in a second.
I think gold is just holding its own, right? I mean, it's up here in the 1730 level, quite strong. Has actually pulled back a bit. I think it's going back higher, back up to 1750, and north of that, it might be a stair step. I don't know. You don't know. No one knows. But what I do know is that I bought a little bit more gold, at least as a trade this week, as it dipped back down to around 1730-ish, and maybe even $1 or $2 below that. And I'm in long gold, I should say, and I'm quite confident in doing so. So I think that's probably as easy as I can make it.
Well said. Like you, I don't know if it's going up or down, on Tuesday or Wednesday or next week, but I do feel pretty confident that, we close the year out somewhere around these levels, if not higher. And with that, let me ask you, and I know because of the amount of deal flow that I'm getting, if I'm getting deals pitched to me, I know you're getting deals pitched to you. What have you seen? And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but I'm just trying to get an update there. What have you seen in the way of deal flow? Are you seeing quality deals come across your email inbox, or is it still just, the run of the mill recycled property in a new bull market type of gold deals that, tend to pop up every time we get a new bull market?
It's both. I've been swatting deals away that are recycled properties. And it's interesting that I haven't even been in this industry long enough, not even long enough, in fact, to see a true ripping gold cycle. And I'm already seeing some of the same projects come across my desks which tells you something about the industry and how short they expect people's memories to be. And that's really probably something we should spend 30 seconds talking about, is that, and it's something I didn't know really a lot when I was younger and less mature and less educated in the sector, is that these properties get recycled all the time. They got all these names: North Star, Golden Moose, Big Bob, whatever the projects are named. And all these companies have these different projects, and you got to keep track of them, right? And so, but it'll just change them. Big Bob will become Little Jim in the next cycle. You know what I mean? And so you gotta you need a spreadsheet. I like spreadsheets to keep track of them all and who promoted them before. And that's where it's good to have people that have seen previous cycles and say, no, that property has been promoted here or there or whatever it is. And so, but to answer your question, I've seen a lot of bad deals. It seems like anybody can raise $1 million right now. Shit, it seems like anybody can raise maybe 2 or 2.5 million right now. Eric Sprott might give it to you himself, from what I've been seeing over the past couple of weeks. And some really quality deals emerging too. Stuff that's been private, teams that have done this before that now see the cycle starting to turn for real. And sort of taking some projects back out under their leadership. And so, yes, I've been seeing quality deals as well. One of the problems, as you and I were talking about before we started recording, is the amount of capital, right? Not that
we don't have Eric Sprott money.
That's exactly right. And so you really got to start deciding who your favorite kids are, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a good part of the cycle. I myself have seen some quality deals come through. I've seen some trash ones, some ATM ones. For those of you not familiar, that's Nick's cuddly Nick's cuddly reference to ass to mouth deals, which are exactly that. So there's been a couple of those as well, but there's been a lot of quality deals, and not just in the gold space. I'm seeing some critical metals deals that all of a sudden look very appetizing and prospective, and so. I think we're at the part of the cycle where it's time to be a stock picker again. Everything will not go up just because the gold price goes higher, or just because we have rising tensions with China and the geopolitical story is back in focus. Please be diligent out there, folks. Make sure that you're vetting these deals. Reach out to your favorite newsletter writer who hopefully, if they're worth the pennies that you're paying them, have geologists they can call and have people they can call that have seen multiple markets and cycles. And so I know that's something I do. I know it's something Nick does. I know for a fact, the better newsletter writers in the space include a Joe Mazumdar, for example, of Exploration Insights, who's an economic geologist and, has experience in the capital markets as well and has seen multiple cycles. And so, just make sure that you're vetting the deals, because I guarantee you that a year from now, we're going to be looking back and there's some deals that we're going to wish frankly never popped up, and people are going to get hurt like they do in every cycle. This is the early stages of a gold bull market that I personally think will be historic, but we've seen these cycles before. That does not mean people won't lose their ass, right?
Oh, that's exactly right. And deals are seemingly formed so quickly. Like, what was one I saw that it's already trying to merge? Like that Gold X deal, right? You have the Lithium X team, which like them or hate them, they got it done. They sold the company. They got their shareholders out. It's been one of my better deals. And not that their management team is viewed favorably by everyone in the sector by all means, but they got it done. And here they come again with Gold X. This is sort of what I mean by management teams coming back out, right? Paul Matizik, et cetera. And I hardly get the slide deck across my desk, and they're proposing merging with Guyana Goldfields and Gran Colombia, right? And so just all kind of deals happening. And, as someone we both listen to says a lot, it's when all the turkeys start flying, right? And gobble, gobble.
Gobble, gobble is right. Let's talk silver really quickly. I still don't have faith. I know Twitter was, they were excited this past week. Silver made a run towards $18. It quickly pulled back, traded exactly as I expected it to, as an industrial metal. And again, I know silver will have its day. I'll believe it when it touches the $21 level and it breaks over $20.50. Until then, I think it's noise. Do you view that differently, Nick? Am I too pessimistic on the silver trade?
No, I don't dabble as thoroughly in silver either. And there was a lot of noise about it this week. Even Mr. Dines got excited about it, sending out an interim warning bulletin and reiterating his call on quality silver stocks. And look, for me, it's like these gold stocks are still about to have their move. And some of these companies were invested in, as I view it. You look at certain things, right? What jurisdictions do I want to be in? I want some North America. I want some Mexico. I want some Peru, whatever it is. But then you got to look at metals baskets. I know you want to talk about copper, but same thing with like gold and silver. And so, there's some companies that are pure gold, like a Revival Gold is all gold in Idaho. And I'm just going to talk about companies that you and I talk about a lot now. Something like an Almaden is like you're getting 50% exposure to silver. And so, based on the silver exposure and some of the companies I'm involved in, I'm content with that, right? It's not like one of these stacker guys. They call themselves stackers. You know that, Gerardo? I'm not one of these silver stacker guys that's out there. So I'm not all about like the Endeavor and the Alexco. That's a different breed.
Are stackers like Packers?
I don't know.
Let's get to copper, because I think copper is sniffing out a potential stimulus package that, is probably like the loudest, most public secret amongst politicians and the political class. Copper touched 240 a pound this week. Obviously, we're a long ways from that $3 mark that we were at before, demand was destroyed at the levels it was destroyed at, which means everything shut down completely. But, I gotta like copper. I love the future of it. I love the long-term demand profile of it. I do believe that we're going to get a huge, by huge, I mean $1 trillion stimulus infrastructure package in the US. China just announced one that, isn't all upfront money, but it's a long-term multi-trillion dollar infrastructure package. And I think, companies that have significant exposure to copper with a good gold kicker in there are going to become more and more attractive. And there's not a lot out there, right? There's a select few companies that have millions of ounces of gold and billions of pounds of copper that are economic at today's prices. So I encourage everybody to do some due diligence on gold copper plays, copper gold plays, because I think they're going to become a lot more attractive very, very soon. I believe that the CEO of Barrick recently mentioned that he's looking for more copper and gold exposure. So if it's good enough for Barrick, it should be good enough for a lot of you that are listening to this looking for a way to make a buck. Any thoughts on that, Nick?
No, Mark Bristow definitely said that a couple of weeks ago. And, when I've been listening to gold CEOs speak, or when I've been speaking to them myself, they're keen to mention their copper credits as well. Who was I interviewing the other week? I was interviewing Amir, for example, with gold mining, and we were running through all his projects. And I get to the end and I say, typical, is there anything else you'd like to mention before we wrap this up? And he goes right into copper, right? Make sure you don't forget, Nick, that our gold equivalent ounces include a lot of copper too, especially in Colombia. So he's quick to mention it too, right? It's on like everybody wants you to know that they've got that copper kicker. And same to your credit, some of these gold copper porphyry deals are really running, or you look at some of the ones that have gotten attention, like Hannon, maybe not as much gold, kind of early to tell, to be honest. But I think copper is great long term, not only for the infrastructure, as it were, with the internet and 5G, but with electric cars as well. And one thing that, and I think I mentioned this before, that Robert Friedland has been keen on with this whole coronavirus thing is like, I'm seeing infomercials already for like, what was it? It was like this copper key you're supposed to use to like punch, select what gas grade you wanted to press the keys on the ATM, right? So you don't have to touch them with your fingers because copper is antimicrobial or antibacterial, whatever, right? So I think you're just going to see a lot more uses for it. Although I don't want it to take away from gold in the interim. It did get to 240. It sort of shied away from it when it got there. And so long term, I think copper is healthy, but I'm not rushing headlong into it right now. So sort of same thing with silver. I got a lot of copper credits that I'm pretty happy with.
Well said. The dollar was relatively stable this week. It did fall below the 100 mark, closing at 99.75, the dollar index. Not much there as far as volatility, not much volatility in the gold space. The VIX, which measures volatility, fell below 30. The markets, the overall indices were relatively stable, though the Dow did have its best performance in 6 weeks. Do you believe this newfound mirage of Fed-induced stability lasts?
I don't know. I'm sort of conflicted. I know you think that stocks can go back to new highs, and I'm not sure if you think they will go back to new highs, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. It's certainly a possibility. It's tough to be a convicted bear on broad-based equities when you've seen what they've done over the past couple of months in the face of the data that has come out in the past couple of months. And we've just sort of wrapped up earnings season, which was pretty bad. I think negative 13% earnings growth was the number, and that's only with sort of 1 month of stay-at-home orders. You've got to think that Q2 earnings numbers are going to be significantly worse, and I'm not sure the market cares. I honestly could probably make an argument for both sides, Gerardo, and so I'm content to sort of try to straddle this thing. I don't know if I've made that clear in my letters and what I've been writing, but you can be like long equities and still like long gold too. It's sort of, we're in this like bizarro world, right? And so I'm not entirely sure. What I will say is that the volume hasn't been giving me the warm and fuzzies in the S&P. Like the volume is light. Here we are already in May. I'm just not sure if people are going to want to buy this with conviction, especially. Well, not especially. I'm just unsure, to be honest. And you look at the rest of the markets, the rest of the global markets, and sorry for making this a long answer, but they're not doing what the U.S. is doing, right? And so, again, I could make an argument that because of that, capital from the rest of the world is going to want to find a home in U.S. equities. And then to further parse that out, it's only going to be select equities. I mean, gosh, this S&P is running on the back of a couple of stocks. Everybody knows that, right? And so just be careful. Make sure you're in, anyway. It's I could make an argument either way, I think.
Understand the cycle that you're investing in, whatever sector, whether it's tech, whether it's, blue chip stocks that are paying a dividend, whether it's gold stocks, whatever you're speculating on or investing into, just make sure that you're investing for the cycle, because the stability won't last. There's just no way that in an election year where one candidate, Biden, can't put a sentence together without offending, and another candidate, Mr. Trump, is out here, telling the fine people of Michigan, what great genes, and what a great bloodline Mr. Ford had, who was a Nazi sympathizer. And he looked all smug when he said it. And the crazy part is, I don't even think Trump's really like a white supremacist. I just think he's got a bunch of white supremacists that feed him this stuff, and it gets applause from the crowd, and it's a good dog whistle, and he'll just do whatever it takes to win. But what I'm saying is, you have two candidates that don't inspire a lot of stability. However you feel about Biden, however you feel about Donald Trump, this is an election year. We're coming into June, folks. The election, if it happens, is going to happen in November. So I don't expect the volatility to remain as stable as it was this week. But with that being said, Sugar Daddy Jerome has a big bazooka to shoot into the markets, and there's a lot of stimulus. I joked about, strip clubs reopening back this weekend and restaurants, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. America reopening. It's going to be hard to bet against the amount of capital that the Fed and the Treasury are injecting into the market, and so we'll see. But it will be volatile. I know that much. Let's talk uranium a little bit at a time. Every week it makes 4-year highs, right? The spot price, it trickled over $34. The equities haven't really moved for a couple of weeks. They've been quiet. Do you think that changes, Nick? Are you following that at all? Or are you just kind of taking a wait and see approach as I am?
I'm following. Uranium pulled back a little bit under $34 for a couple of days, went back to $34. I think you're going to see, you were just talking about the cycle. I think one of the things you're going to see, along with a return to a favorability or a favorable opinion of gold, is just a more favorable opinion of hard assets in general as things that are real, right? We just came out of a cycle where, just look at SoftBank this week, for crying out loud, right? Where large multi-billion-dollar bets were being made on these unicorns that weren't profitable. This is something that we've talked about ad nauseum on this podcast, right? Where 40% of the stocks that publicly traded on main exchanges weren't operating profitably. And so I think you get a reverberation from that, man. I think you get investors, at least a tiny bit, looking at more hard assets and things that are real. And I think uranium is a part of that. And alongside that, there's a lot of other things that are coming into uranium's favor. We've talked about the closing of the chapter of the Nuclear Fuel Working Group that sort of brings some stability back and at least some clarity on what the policy guidance is going to be. And I guess what I wanted to talk about in uranium is that I see it like trickling slowly into the mainstream, right? Where like uranium and nuclear is sort of like a niche thing for a long time. And then slowly but surely with the you have like the Germans sort of like the information coming out there that maybe they shouldn't have shut down their nuclear reactors. And then you have some mainstream environmentalists turn and start to be supporters of nuclear and saying that, nuclear and renewables can't be strange bedfellows any longer. They can't be at odds with each other. And then you get this Section 232 thing that not only talks about the reliance on however you want to categorize those nations, not so friendly nations to the United States, maybe, that we're relying on for the uranium. But not only that, really what I've seen come out of this 232 thing is like an eye back on just nuclear and nuclear tech in general. Like there was an article, and I can put up a link to it in Science magazine this week with the headline, U.S. Department of Energy rushes to build advanced new nuclear reactors. And it wasn't sort of like a poo-poo nuclear article. I mean, this was a pro-nuclear. We're throwing hundreds of millions at this to come up with new designs that are more efficient and modular. And the quotes that were in there from physicists at big universities, I think the one that was quoted was from like the University of Chicago, was talking about these talking points that we've long known, right? That when renewables get to 30%, they're cheaper now. Because the upfront cost of nuclear is so high. But once they get to 30% of the grid, the intermittency is going to make them not competitive anymore. And the only way to sort of complement that and not increase emissions is with nuclear, right? And I'm just slapping my fucking forehead while I'm reading this article. Like, no shit, Sherlock. Fuck. Like, well, you mean we're not building solar roads? Anyway. And so, I wrote a check to Sky Harbor a couple of weeks ago. I own still a lot of Azarga, and I think they're going to be fine. I'm not sure how they respond there's still a lot of uncertainty with this virus thing, right? I think slowly but surely we're putting that behind us. We'll talk about that more in a second. But barring some sort of second wave, Earth goes back to hell in a handbasket with this virus, I think, late 2020 and 2021, you get this uranium cycle start to kick in because the utilities simply got to come back then, right?
Absolutely. Let's talk about the reopening of America. All 50 states now have, in some shape, way, or form, reopened. Dr. Anthony Fauci, who, for whatever reason has become a favorite target of the right, which is interesting considering that his boss is Donald Trump, right? But they've deflected Donald Trump's policies and projected them on Dr. Fauci. He said in an interview today that, states should take significant precautions with social distancing, but it is absolutely time to start to reopen the economy. He said we had to shut down because we didn't know exactly what we were dealing with, and we had this explosion in cases. But now we're a lot clearer, and there's a lot of good work going into it. Now, with that being said, global cases, more than 5 million, global deaths, 335,000, 100,000 of those, close to 100,000 have come here from the U.S., more than 1.5 million cases in the U.S. And so what have we learned, Nick, from the COVID-19 lockdown? What have you learned? Let's go there. Let's personalize it a little bit. Have you learned anything? Have you learned anything that is different in your opinion of COVID and the policy response by the Trump administration and administrations around the world, where you look at something very differently than you did initially?
I wish I had prepared for this question. Let me start with the people, and then I'll think while I talk about the people. One of the things I think I saw was the initial willingness of people to be so sheepish, right? Like including myself, because it was something brand new, and it was something foreign, and it was something scary, right? You're talking about death and disease, and those initial numbers that were coming out, hundreds of thousands, millions of deaths, whatever, were scary. I remember in February thinking, gosh, it was like, I have to take it back to Game of Thrones because I think about that's how I was like talking about it back then, right? It was like the last sort of battle where you're just waiting for the White Walkers to show up, right? And it's like, fuck, I'm about to have to go outside and fight these White Walkers to the death. But then that sort of like didn't materialize in a couple of weeks. And so after that, I started sort of, I mean, I knew this, but I started seeing it in real time, right? Just people entirely not cowering, but not willing to discover things for themselves, not willing to entertain the other side of it, and not believing what was right in front of their face, still believing the narrative that was coming from, which I think in retrospect we can say fairly now was a bit heavy on the fear side, which I guess you got to be when you're looking at a pandemic. But even now, I still see with the data clearly showing that this isn't as bad as it was initially purported to be. People almost rooting for it. And I made this distinction last week, I think it was. Like, I'm not rooting for the disease to be bad. I'm not rooting for stocks to go down. I'm just grounded in reality. And I think we got a real economic thing to deal with now. But I see people still hung up on this virus and arguing about the politics of it. And especially like this Florida thing where Florida's kind of like doing okay and everybody wants to like shit on it. And so I don't know. I think I'm as confused as anybody else about the response and what's real and how deadly it is and what's really being used to treat it efficaciously. But from my lens here in Spokane, we had 400 cases, right? Restaurants are back open today. I told you a couple of weeks ago, my wife was headed to the nail salon. That turned out fine. We'll go to a restaurant next Friday. We'll let it play out for a week and see how things go. But I don't know. I guess just people's timidness still, sheepishness is what I'm seeing, and their willingness to outsource their safety, because I'm a total like secure your own safety kind of guy, right?
Absolutely. No, I agree with that. I think there's, probably a couple of points. We've seen countries that did not respond the way the US did with the lockdowns and the way that China did with its lockdown. And unfortunately, if you look at Brazil and you look at South America, you have what looks like an entire continent that now has got a serious problem, right? And a large part of that, I think, has to do, if you look at where in Brazil, for example, these new outbreaks are occurring at a time where everywhere else we're seeing the infection rate, not the amount of cases because we're testing more now, but the infection rates start to come down and the hospitalization rates start to come down relative to the amount of people that we're testing and are, checking into hospitals. If we look at all that, we can clearly see that distancing worked. Now, was that worth shutting down the global economy? Whole different conversation, right? I think there's probably 40 million people here in the United States that have filed for unemployment that would have a pretty spirited opinion about whether or not that was worth it. But again, I think one thing that is clear is that areas with high density, like New York here in the U.S., like Chicago here in the U.S., like Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, Sao Paulo in Brazil, I think density is most absolutely something that if we do have a second wave in the fall and winter time, we are going to have to be very, very targeted in our response. I don't believe that a second wave, if it happens, the way many doctors and people that do this for a living are predicting, because it's a virus and that's how they act. If we get a second wave, I don't believe, one, that America, including myself, is signing up for another complete lockdown. But two, I hope that the regions and areas that were hardest hit, where it's clear that the population density has contributed to that in a significant way, I hope they are better prepared. I got really tired, much like yourself, Nick, of hearing the political debate about the Trump administration saying it was the Obama administration, that left the shelves bare. And this guy's been in office for 3 years. Well, if they were bare, you should have gone shopping and replenished it because you've had 3 years, right? I got really tired of the political disagreements behind what is a health issue and a self-induced depression. And I hope that the second go round, if this comes back in the fall time, is more targeted, is more intelligent, is less partisan. And unfortunately, my fear is that because it's going to coincide with a November election, I fear that may not be the case. I see a lot of, the videos in the news and on Twitter of just some uppity privileged people being real assholes to people that are just trying to make a living and trying to keep them safe. I can tell you, if I am out with my kids and some jerk coughs on purpose on me or my kids, there is going to be a different concern for that person and their health. And it won't be because of COVID. And I'm seeing a lot of workers that are just, working, making $10, $15 an hour at Target and at Walmart and at, your local grocery store. And all they're trying to do is keep people safe, and a lot of people being assholes to them. And I hope that we can get some sense of decency as a collective, right? As a collective society about who implemented the policy, who it affected, and the fact that really, like we said in the beginning, we're all in this together. Let's find a better sense of community, because, and again, I know Twitter isn't the real world, but there are a lot of real assholes out there that are showing their ass right now.
Well, it's real world stuff too, and I guess that's one of the other things I've noticed is that, I know people that live in Maryland that have gone to their second home in Florida, right? And you can start by saying right away that that's like a privileged problem, right?
Yes, it is.
And so listen, this actually gets even better, right? And so they're talking about how all the New York license plates they're seeing on the way driving down to Florida, and how people in the Florida neighborhoods are basically like openly opposed to all these New Yorkers coming down. If you look, and if I remember, I'll put a link up, but there's a New York Times interactive map that shows where because the New Yorkers fled, right? Like you said, when this first broke out, if you have money, you're going to be fine. And all the people with money in New York, they got the fuck out, right? And where did they go? Well, we know where they went because of mail forwarding. And so the New York Times did a map of where they all went, and they drew the arrows, and you can see how many people went where, but a lot went to Florida. We know that there's a lot of New Yorkers in Florida anyway. I'm making this a long story, but all these Floridians are upset that all these New Yorkers are coming. And so there's like this animosity where if you got an out-of-state license plate, like you're getting some flack from the locals. And so I'll tell you what this person's solution was, and you're going to laugh really hard.
I can't wait.
They parked their Maryland license plate car in their garage, and they got out their Florida license plate car. So now they're locals.
I love it. But again, all jokes aside, that's hilarious. But all jokes aside, the fact that we have to do that, the fact that, I see it here in Texas. I mean, my wife and I and our family moved from Alaska. My wife is born and raised there. I spent 17 years there. We met there, and we moved here to Austin in the Round Rock area 8 years ago, and 7 years ago, and now we've been here long enough where we consider it home, and we've seen the growth and the transition, and we're getting 35% of Californians are moving into Texas, and there a lot of them are moving here. And there's this attitude, and it's been exacerbated recently with this whole COVID-19 thing, about Californians, coming to Texas and changing, the culture and changing the fiber of Texan society, whatever that is. Right. And so I hate that we're at a point in culture and society.
Like Texas stole it from Mexico?
Exactly. That's where I was going. Texas, right? And so it's just, I laugh and I cringe at the short-sightedness of some people instead of embracing people. And, I just had a social distancing gathering with some friends at our second home, which is 20 minutes from here, right? Speaking of privilege, and we all sat 6 feet away, and we were outside, and a couple of them were Trump supporters, and we were having this exact same dialogue about, let's talk ideas. Don't ask me if I like Trump. Ask me about the policy. Ask me about specific things, and I'm more than happy to have that debate with you. A fact-based debate that's respectful, and we did that, and it was great. It was fantastic. But even they, there was a couple there that we're friends with, and even they said, well, I just hope we don't keep getting these Californians and their attitudes. And California is, almost 30 million people. Like, they're not all the same. You and I have friends in California that tend to lean more to the right than to the left, and are also very privileged and well off. And, I just think it's time to look at things in a completely different way. And I hope that this fourth turning that's happening is something that enables that moving forward, so that my kids, can have adult conversations with adults that aren't ideologue based, right? Aren't just based on political party or ideology, or have it be fact based and science based and respectful and civil. And anyhow,
well, that's just it. And to name drop one more person, at Outsider Club, one of the editors there has formed a relationship with Gary Johnson, the former governor of New Mexico, who's run on the Libertarian presidential ticket twice now. And he had a conversation with him this week that I thought was pretty fascinating. I mean, he sat down and talked with Gary Johnson for 25 minutes about all sorts of stuff. But one of the things that came up was about how Justin Amash is now dropped out of running for the Libertarian ticket, even after switching his party affiliation from Republican to Libertarian, and then saying he was going to run, and then basically a couple of weeks later saying he was going to back out. And you could sort of just see it on Gary Johnson's face, because it was a video interview, sort of like how disheartened he was, right? Because he was saying that Justin Amash was probably the Libertarians' best chance. Not that he was going to win, of course, but that he was a congressman with a name, right? And now you're just going to get some Joe Schmo that is going to be on the ticket that nobody's going to care about. And at least the media would have had to cover Amash, right? And so, no prize this year. See you in 4.
That's it, right? Let me ask you, we had, I was talking with my brother-in-law yesterday, and I was sitting here and I said, listen, I don't understand. I said, I still think Trump has a pretty legit chance of winning, especially if they continue to paper over, the depression that was brought on by the lockdown. If they just continue to send people checks and continue to promise, jobs and continue to promise stimulus and, a little bit at a time to keep them on the vine, then, hey, maybe in November he wins again. And he's a very rational, logical person. And he said, well, I just don't see that being the case. And I said, well, listen, when's the last time you heard Joe Biden campaign and say something, more than one sentence long that was coherent and substantive? And his answer was like, man, yeah, he has been quiet. And so, of course, today we get Joe Biden, and he does the Breakfast Club, which is a podcast and a radio show based out of New York. And he's talking to the host, African American, a black host. Charlemagne the God is his entertainment name, and he they're talking politics, and Charlemagne was explaining that just because Donald Trump is who Donald Trump is doesn't automatically ensure that he would be voting for a Joe Biden. He wants the candidate to earn his vote, like everyone should, right? And so Joe Biden responds by saying, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black. And so this was his first day back on the campaign trail in a meaningful way. And again, this is the rhetoric that we're getting from the Democrats on the left, right? And so it's, to your point, Nick, it's extremely disheartening that the two options that we have are 70-something-year-old white men that are clearly out of touch with the makeup of this country, economically, demographically, and one of those two will be the next president of the United States, right? That's just the way it's going to go. So, yeah, see you in 4, and let's see what happens between now and November. It should be interesting.
I'm surprised he didn't add Jack to that, because he always loves to call people Jack, right? Like, you ain't black, Jack. I'm just surprised he didn't say it.
And the man at the end, right? If you don't know,
right.
if you don't know the difference between me and Donald Trump, you don't know me, man.
I thought it was made by, like, have you seen on Twitter the Joe Biden insult generator? Have you seen that?
I have not. Can you put a link to it?
I can put a link, but you can tweet to the Joe Biden insult generator, and the Joe Biden will then insult you in Joe Biden speak, like you 2-timing boogaloo Jack, or whatever he comes back with. It's funny, and I'll put a link.
That's hilarious. Aunt Becky, Lori Loughlin, has pleaded guilty in the college admission scandal. There's so much going on in the world, it doesn't really matter. I just thought it was funny because the judge said he would not accept the guilty plea until he read the sentencing report. And my first thought was, didn't you watch Full House, man? Didn't you see that Aunt Becky doesn't deserve to be in prison? All jokes aside, the deal was 2 months. Because of this COVID-19, it was well timed to plead guilty. I doubt she'll do more than 2 weeks. It'll likely be home confinement a la Paul Manafort. And you know, at the end of the day, it is what it is. It's privileged people, it's well-off people gaming the system, and they got caught, and the penalty will be very, very, very minimal. Meanwhile, you know, the rest of the world.
You can't let it go though, because it's so easy to dismiss those sorts of things, right? And I know we're going to sweep it under the rug and say there's a lot more going on, but I got to bring up the FBI in this getting hand jobs again, right?
Yep, I'm so disheartened is the only reason I didn't want to delve deeper. I'm disheartened, Nick. I said it last week. If I could short justice and morality in America, I would.
That's it, because you got the people here who are supposed to be like the holder-uppers of the law, right? The FBI, the sort of like, even the agency that like law enforcement people aspire to be in, right? And then, they're just like getting hand jobs from the people they're trying to protect. And so, gosh, if you can't rely on that, right? Like, like you say, short justice.
Yeah, and mind you, these are, again, and we talked about it last week, but this wasn't just the FBI getting hand jobs from willing people that were willing to give them hand jobs. Nothing wrong in that, a consensual hand job. This was FBI agents assigned to protect exploited sex workers and victims of sexual assault and sex trafficking, and taking advantage of that profile. And instead of protecting these mostly women, they were basically re-victimizing them again. And, I look at all the money that was spent on this college admission scandal. This was a major case. This was tax dollars, not that it matters apparently anymore. This was a lot of tax dollars that were spent investigating. And you know what? For the most part, everybody got to plead guilty. Most people are going to do a month or two. Most of it will be home confinement. Most of them will pay a fine. And it's just, again, the fact that that's where justice in America is at the highest level is disheartening. It's disappointing. And it is what it is, I guess.
Yep, and it'll be forgotten soon because there's so much more going on.
There is. Let's pivot back. Let's pivot back to the markets. I know we talked uranium, we talked copper, silver, gold, of course, the overall indices. I know you have concerns about the lithium space, and we haven't talked about this off air, so I would love to hear your thoughts, why you're concerned, and where you think that space, what it looks like moving forward, where it goes.
I'm not sure. Like I say in the doc there, I just am a little concerned for a couple of reasons. I obviously like the space. I've had success in the space. Whether or not you want to call advantage a success might remain to be seen. We'll have to see what sort of work Cobre does. But I'm just looking at all these other deals that have tried and failed or haven't been able to get it done, secure financing, Namaska or whatever it is, and even ones that I've done diligence on that I put on a short list that I'm sort of like getting more comfortable with. They just haven't seemed to do it. And I was just running through tickers today, looking at charts, and it just wasn't really like exciting to me, right? Like they weren't going the right way. And then as I told you earlier, I'm kind of looking for a car. And so I've just been doing my searching here and there. And granted, I'm a truck guy, and that's not really the battery forte, but I guess there's a couple of battery trucks out there. I didn't come across a single one, and it's sort of like, to me, it's almost coming a solar road thing. It's like, maybe it's because of where I live, but it's like I just haven't seen the mass adoption yet that we keep saying is going to come. And then, not that I haven't not believed it for a while, but when you add in this oil thing is sort of like another kicker, right? Like I filled up my truck for $50 yesterday. Like why do I need to buy that's 28 gallons? And so why do I need an electric car if I'm not a greenie and I'm not worried about, I guess, what's coming out of my tailpipe? And I don't know. It's just, I thought it was an interesting conversation to have because I haven't seen much working and I don't own much in the space, and I'm sort of trying to get excited about it, but I haven't been able to convince myself.
Yeah, I think we've learned that mining lithium and producing, the carbonate and the hydroxide and the all the different types of lithium that go into the different applications is harder than it appeared when the bull market in lithium developed, right? Everybody just added lithium to the end of their name, and all of a sudden everybody had rocks and
it's dirt. Like graphite, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You had rocks and dirt in Nevada that were gold plays that, became lithium plays, and nobody had water to do anything with it. But, these companies ran, and then it was a round trip and they ran right back. So I think we've definitely learned that the technical expertise that's required is likely only going to be sourced at the highest levels. And there's not enough of that know-how to go around. Now, with that being said, I know Q1 sales in Europe and Q2 is going to be miserable, obviously, but Q1, they reached a record high of 217,000 vehicles and a penetration rate of 6.5%. And so that's encouraging. I know that obviously demand in China, for Q2 is going to be tough, but they have a government mandate to incentivize the development and the purchase of getting the grid established and getting electric vehicles on the road. And that's an environmental mandate, not so much, just government wants to subsidize for subsidy's sake. A lot of these cities are atrociously polluted at best. And so the only way around that is to cut down on some of the CO2. And that's an easy way to do it and incentivize your economy. So I guess I'm a bit more optimistic, though the picture definitely now is like our theme last week. It's a picture of haves and have-nots. If you have the technical expertise, if you have the financial backing, if you have a jurisdiction, that's becoming more important, right? A jurisdiction that allows you to operate in a reasonable fashion. I think there's a lot of money still left to be made in the space, but I do believe that the money is going to be made by a handful of producers, the Lithium Americas of the world, and some other names out there. But I am a bit more optimistic, and that may be because of where I live. Living in Austin and Round Rock, I can't count on two hands just on a daily basis when I am out. The few times that I venture out into the world, the amount of electric vehicles out there. So yeah.
And what about now? So this is the other thing that I meant to mention alongside the oil is this work from home thing. I guess that's the other thing I was thinking about, right? If Facebook is going work from home and Jeffrey's Bank people don't need to go back from, commute their little 20 miles from their suburbs outside the city, then why do they need a fancy electric car? I guess that was sort of in my line of thought there somewhere.
Yeah, let's hope that with the strip clubs back open and the restaurants back open,
still gotta go somewhere,
and the bars back open. Let's hope that we all develop antibodies and they're able to develop a vaccine and treatment, and that our scientific community comes through the way I think they will. And things are somewhat back to normal within the next 6 to 12 months. Right. And then let's hope that, around the world, we are better prepared the next time, because, we could argue about whether the lockdown was worth the economic consequences of it. You could make a pretty good argument that the reason it wasn't as severe is because of the fact that we locked down, and that's what, prevented for the most part the explosion in cases that was anticipated according to all the models. Or you could argue that we could have done like Sweden and just really looked after the most vulnerable parts of the population, and you would have mitigated the economic disaster that has resulted because of the lockdowns. Both of those arguments are pretty valid. I think there's points on both sides, but I hope that the point that we take out of everything is that we need to be better prepared, because there will be a next pandemic. And eventually we are going to get one where tag you're it and you're dead, right?
I hope not.
It's the history of the world, Nick. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know if it'll happen in our lifetime, but the history of the world says those are going to come around every generation or two. And maybe this was just a heads up, because I got to tell you, if this had turned into one of those, it would have been catastrophic. And no disrespect to, the 100,000 people that have passed here in the U.S. and, the over 5 million people around the world that have died. But, on a global scale, if you take those numbers and you look, I was showing my 11-year-old a chart the other day, and even he looked at it and he said, I showed him population charts and I compared, hospitalization rates and infection rates. And he said, that's it. And in his mind, just from what he's seen from school and conversations with friends and, what's in the news, in his mind, he said, well, he's like, it's sad for those people, Dad, but I just thought it was a lot more people than this. And so, I hope we're better prepared, because we're, sooner or later we will get one that is a lot more deadly and a lot less forgiving. And if this is the response to it, it's not going to be good.
Yeah. Hopefully we take the lessons to heart.
That's it. Let's talk positive stories, Nick. I got to believe that you have something on deck, and I see something on the document here that we share, that we put together 10 minutes before the podcast.
So I just wanted to tell you about Ratko Rudik, who I think I knew about but had forgotten about. And if you've ever watched Olympics water polo, then you've seen this guy's face. You might have not known his name, but I'll put a link up and you can see a picture and you'll recognize his face. This guy was apparently one badass motherfucker. And not just a water polo player, but as a coach. So the articles I was reading, and the one I've got up here now, is from the Wall Street Journal. So the Wall Street Journal is obviously writing about this guy. He is the best coach, they're calling him, of any sport ever. Better than Belichick, better than Vince Lombardi, better than Mike Krzyzewski, better than Greg Popovich. They're saying just all around a best coach ever in any sport. So let me give you the numbers. He has the most Olympic appearances at 9 for the most countries, 5 different countries, with the most medals, 5 as a coach, 1 as a player, and the most gold medals, 4, and the most longevity between his medals, 28 years between his first and last as a player and a coach. And so the article goes into his coaching style and his philosophy on life and how he coached all these different teams. It wasn't just one team. It was Yugoslavia, and Italy, and US, and Croatia, and Brazil. And then, like, the heartwarming story, the reason that Americans are supposed to care is because he came and turned around our U.S. water polo team after he hit rock bottom in the industry, in the sport, and like cussed out a judge at one of the Olympics and was banned for the sport from a year. And then he got to come back and he had to coach the worst team ever, like the Bad News Bears story, right? And the worst team ever was the U.S. team, and that's who he coached, and he brought them to greatness. But just it goes into his tactics and how he's a good man outside of the water polo, but a brutal coach, man. I mean, people were throwing up at every practice. One of his tactics was to have no holds barred wrestling in the deep end, and basically you lost when you drowned.
Ouch.
And so anyway, I'll put the link up, but they don't make them like this anymore.
They don't make them like that anymore is right. I'm not familiar just looking at the name, but, I'll dig into it when you put the link up and take a peek. And you said it's pretty world renowned. So we'll see if I recognize him, and I'll get more familiar with his methods, I guess.
There you go. And he's not dead. He's just retired. So that was why the article was in the news. He retired.
ESPN should do a documentary on him. I mean, I just got done with the Michael Jordan one. It was 10 episodes, and me growing up in Chicago and, lifelong Bulls fan until the stupid front office ran him and Phil Jackson out of town. It was fantastic. It was well done. And I think obviously there's still a little bit of time to put some new quality content up there. That would be interesting.
We actually watched the Michael Jordan documentary in our house. It was good.
Excellent. Nick, any stocks we should be watching this week?
I keep your eye on gold. Like I said at the beginning, I bought some gold at the, it was probably like 2 days ago. And so I think we're going to see gold go back up higher. Stocks. Let's talk about Rupert again for a second. We talked about the drill hole they put out the other week where the stock doubled. They followed that up again with some more high quality results. They're really exposing this new deep geology in Finland. I had a chance to catch up with the CEO since we last recorded a podcast, who was sort of filling in the blanks for me. And that's sort of like the best drill hole that's ever come out of Finland, the one from 2 weeks ago, right? And just developing really nicely. And you talk about Where's the gold going to come from, et cetera. Well, here's a company with a resource and a mill. And so we've talked about other companies with resources and mills, and that's sort of like my wheelhouse, right? I mean, I don't know how that ended up being, but that's sort of where I feel comfortable and how I sort of can get a real good handle on the valuations and the upside, as opposed to some of these more exploratory plays, especially some that have, run on some drill holes, and I just can't justify those valuations to myself without a resource and some infrastructure like these other deals have. I'm sorry if that sounds a little bit vague, but what I'm saying is I look at some companies that are out there, 50, 60, 70, $100 million market caps that are just running on drill holes. And I get that, back to the life cycle of a mining play, right? I get that that's the exciting part. But if I can buy something at a cheaper valuation that I know definitively has more ounces, and I can bet that valuation is going to catch up, right, as the cycle comes, that's just where I feel more comfortable. And so I haven't bought any more, Rupert, but that story is getting much more interesting.
Agreed. There's some bargains in the space. If you like infrastructure and you like gold, you have to like Revival Gold. It's been on a good run here the last couple of weeks. Still just has a market cap under $50 million. Has, gold on the leach pads, has a significant infrastructure advantage in Idaho, great jurisdiction, 3 million ounces across all categories, headed to 5, and they're undertaking a PEA for a near-term production decision/scenario. So Revival is one. If you like infrastructure and you like gold and you like good management teams, that still looks attractive despite the recent run-up in price. One that caught my eye today, and I've been watching it all week, slowly but surely, is an exploration play that's got a solid management team, part of the Discovery group of companies. It's K2 Gold. K2 has been pretty dormant with the exception of news about 2 months ago on some trenches at its Mojave Californian gold project. A project that John Robbins called the best early stage gold camp he had ever seen. Now, the stock is up some 40% this week on pretty decent volume, 100,000 plus shares on a daily basis. And so the market cap is still tiny. It's still just 12 million. But I got to believe there's some news in lieu of the rise in share price. Has to be something, right? I don't believe that even in this market, an exploration play is going to rise 40% for no reason. So I'm curious to see what the next week brings for K2 Gold, and bringing it back to Finland, Mawson Resources, right? Who I think would put up a good case about, robust drill results out of Finland. And they have assays pending on, I believe, 13 holes that should be published, I believe, within the next week or two. They seem to have a really good understanding of that geologic model. They've hit some high grade. I think they have a resource estimate coming out in the next month or two that should be approaching about 1 million ounces of gold. And they believe they can grow that to 2 and 3 million relatively quickly. They also just happen to raise $18 million Canadian. And that's keep an eye on Mawson.
Relatively easily getting exciting in Australia, and I got an eye on Mawson as well.
I like it. Anything else you'd like to add, Mr. Hodge? I don't know if you got big weekend plans. Spokane is opening back up. Texas is opening back up. You going anywhere?
No, we don't have any plans to go anywhere, but it is Memorial Day weekend, and so maybe spend a moment reflecting on why you're able to go somewhere at will. And I think we got some steaks, and here in the Pacific Northwest, it's wild mushroom season. So we get these lovely morels and porcinis that grow in the burn areas. And I got this old guy at the farmer's market who's missing all his teeth. And I might have told you about him before, but
yep.
He does wild huckleberries and morels, and his fingers are always stained from picking the berries. And he's a wonderful gentleman. And so I'll go buy some mushrooms from him on Saturday and grill them with my steak. What do you got going on?
I love it. The same, we're gonna shack up here at home, grill some steaks, hang out with the kids, get a little swimming in, and maybe drive into town and just see how out and about everybody is. I'm definitely not ready to go back to a restaurant yet, or the gym. Waiting another week or two to see if the recent opening here leads to an increase in hospitalization rates and infection rates. And if the data comes back the way it's been trending, then maybe in the next week or two it's time to start getting back out there a little bit at a time. But be safe and shack up another week or so.
That's it. Lay low. Enjoy the time at home for the 3-day weekend.
Happy Memorial Day weekend. I hope by the time you read this, it'll be Monday. I hope everybody had a great one. Absolutely take the time to remember why we get to do the things that we're able to do in this country. I'm Gerardo Del Real, along with Mr. Nick Hodge. This was episode 71 of Bizarro World. Have a great week, everyone.
See ya.